This episode contains distressing themes and descriptions of violence. This podcast is intended for a mature audience. Listener caution is advised. Wedged between an advertisement for a tailor shop and a short article entitled "Deadly Day of Love" about the commonality of suicide on Valentine's Day was a half-page segment regarding a husband and wife winning a car. The Burton Mail published the article in March 1990. A local couple had the good fortune of winning a Vauxhall Astra with 2 years' worth of free petrol. The accompanying picture is fuzzy. Sandra and Ryan James pose almost formally and rigidly, while standing behind the vehicle with the garage owner poised to hand over the keys. The next time the couple were mentioned in the newspaper, it would not be for such joyous reasons. Welcome to Season 9, Episode 11 of They Walk Among Us, a podcast dedicated to UK true crime. After receiving A grades at the grammar school in his hometown of Ammerford in Dyfed, Wales, David Ryan James was accepted to study at the Royal Veterinary College in London. James, who went by his middle name, studied for 5 years and gained a Bachelor of Veterinary Science degree specialising in the care of horses. His career was on track, and he became a member of the Royal College of Veterinary Surgeons. Despite the positive trajectory of his business life, Ryan James's personal life was not without his problems. His marriage was falling apart, and he moved away, leaving behind his wife of 3.5 years and a daughter. Returning to Wales, James found employment at a veterinary surgery in Welshpool, where he stayed for about 1.5 years. During this time in 1981, he met his second wife, who had required his expertise with a horse she was training in Shrewsbury, an English town near the Welsh border. Unfortunately, the animal had to be put down, but the pair remained in contact. James was perhaps more interested than legal secretary Sandra Margaret Lomax. She had been engaged before, and James was still married to his wife at the time. Their affair inevitably ended his marriage. When love finally blossomed for both of them, they made a home in Burton-on-Trent in Staffordshire, nearly 100 miles away from Rochdale, where Sandra grew up. Sandra Lomax became Sandra James in May 1982, and the couple started a family. Sandra loved children. She had been a nanny for a short time in her late teens in Belgium, but during a horrific incident she was raped, and understandably Sandra returned to England. The couple purchased a property on Tower Road, a befitting place for someone who made partner at a local veterinary surgery and a growing young family. James and Sandra were fond of animals, particularly horses, and their shared goal was eventually to start a stud farm, but that never became a reality. By 1993, they had 3 children under 6, Daniel, Thomas, and Bethan. Sandra had put her career on hold to take care of them full-time, and she subsequently became involved with the children's school, regularly attending parent-teacher association meetings. Sociable and popular, Sandra excelled at organising events. Perhaps not as gregarious as his wife, Ryan James enjoyed more solitary pursuits, such as playing the piano and shooting. The other parents Sandra made friends with were impressed by her parenting skills, so much so that one mother asked Sandra to take care of one of her youngest children while she was on holiday in Singapore. an act of kindness that would later lead to Sandra's life unraveling. At the beginning of 1994, Ryan James asked another veterinary staff member to take over his shift for at least a few days because he had a family emergency. His wife was so sick she was unable to look after the children or herself. In fact, there were moments when James said Sandra did not even recognize him. At the time, local GPs could make house calls. However, James had not contacted the doctor's surgery. He later claimed that he didn't seek medical attention for his wife as it was not what she would have wanted. He said she had lost faith in all doctors. On the morning of January 13, 1994, 38-year-old Sandra James was found unresponsive in her bed by her husband in the master bedroom at the rear of the house. Rays of morning light shone through the gaps at the side of the closed curtains in the dimly lit room. Sandra's head protruded from the two quilts she was wrapped in. An oversized sweatshirt covered the top half of her body, and she wore a nightdress underneath. After paramedics had been unable to revive her, the police were called to the scene as there were some questions surrounding the circumstances of Sandra's death. Everything seemed to be in order. Clean folded laundry was stacked neatly on the bed. There were no apparent signs of a struggle or break-in, and nothing seemed untoward, apart from the cord for the home telephone which had been pulled out of the wall. Detective Sergeant Kenneth Vaughan noted the left side of Sandra's face was leaning on the pillow. He flattened his hand to carefully run it between the fabric and her skin to check if her position shielded a head injury. She was not cold to the touch. When Shirley Wilson, a scene of crime officer, arrived, some orange liquid in a glass on the bedside table was one of the items collected as evidence. At a later visit to the house, other items were seized for analysis, including a syringe. Ryan James had made Detective Sergeant Vaughan aware of the syringe's existence and where it could be found on top of the wardrobe in the main bedroom. Upon examination of the body, the pathologist noted no evidence of a violent struggle, although puncture marks were found on Sandra's feet and the back of one hand. The orange liquid on the bedside table was orange juice, but within it was Immobilon, a drug used to anesthetize horses. Revivon, an antidote to Immobilon, was also found in Sandra's system. Interestingly, there was no drug residue in the flesh surrounding the pinprick-sized wounds. Phenobarbital was also identified in Sandra's body. The drug is a versatile barbiturate used off-brand for the treatment of animals who have extreme seizures. It is also a prescribed medication to humans, sometimes used for epilepsy, addiction treatments, and insomnia, but in some cases it had been used in suicide attempts. Sandra's brother Stephen Lomax and his wife Helen visited in the days following Sandra's death. They wanted to talk to Ryan James about what happened and to be near the children. What James told Stephen about Sandra's death didn't sit right with him. They were close siblings, and Stephen found it hard to believe that his sister had chosen to take her own life and leave her children behind. Stephen felt like his brother-in-law was trying to convince him that suicide was the only explanation. Over a decade of marriage and 3 children together, the Jameses' relationship reached a point of no return, though Sandra hoped otherwise. Catherine Crooks, who had left one of her children with Sandra while she went on holiday, had become a fixture around the home. Sandra paid it no mind, as the couple were friends with Catherine and her husband David. They had 3 children and attended the same school meetings as Sandra did. The 2 couples also often socialized by going out for meals or day trips with their children. Catherine's friendship with Ryan James started innocently enough. However, things developed, and they subsequently had an affair. At first glance, it may have even been possible to mistake Catherine for Sandra. They both had dark, almost black hair. By October 1993, 3 months before Sandra was found dead, she came to learn about the betrayal, which had started months earlier. Prior to this, Catherine Crooks and Ryan James had decided to tell their spouses simultaneously, but Sandra, sensing a shift in their marriage, confronted her husband first. Once her suspicions were confirmed, she angrily got into her car and drove to the Crooks' home. Sandra's sister Kathleen subsequently said her sibling was devastated. The marriage appeared to be over when Ryan James and Catherine Crooks moved in together, renting a bungalow while Sandra James remained in the family home on Tower Road. With 2 homes to financially support even on a substantial wage, it was a stretch for Ryan James. He was later said to be nearly £140,000 in debt. Soon thereafter, when the short lease on the bungalow ended, James convinced Sandra to let him return to the family home. Unbeknownst to Sandra, it was a financial decision, not just so James could see more of the children. On top of that, the affair with Catherine Crooks had not ended. The pair just became more inventive in ways to meet outside the home. A few days before Christmas, James was confronted by an old friend of his wife's. In response, he said he hadn't seen Catherine in a week. Reluctantly, Sandra went away for a few days during the festive period, leaving her husband behind and taking the children to Lancashire to visit her brother. When Sandra had left the house, James discreetly invited Catherine to stay at the property with the family dog. After the new year rolled around, a friend visited Sandra James on January 11th. Sandra was in a sorry condition, extremely unwell and drawn to the radiator to keep warm. Ryan James admitted to being in the house during this period and told the police that he was the one to unplug the telephone before leaving to meet Catherine. His wife was later found dead on the morning of January 13th. Upon her death, Sandra James's life insurance policy would pay out £180,000 to her next of kin, although Sandra wrote a new will after she discovered her husband's infidelity. It read, "I leave my entire estate to my children, Daniel, Thomas and Bethan, in equal shares. I leave my Vauxhall Cavalier to my brother Stephen Lomax. All items of clothing belonging to me are to be burned until destroyed. All items of jewellery are to be held by my brother and sister-in-law and divided as they see fit among my children." Sandra ended the will with a sentence addressed to her husband. "David Ryan James, I leave you absolutely nothing. I have loved you and lost you. I will never forget." Before she passed away, Sandra James had visited her GP after she learned of her husband's affair. She had trouble sleeping, and although petite before the revelation, Sandra went on to lose a further 2 stone. Sleeping pills were prescribed to assist her in getting some rest. During the last visit to the doctor's surgery a month before she was found dead, Her GP could see the situation at home had taken its toll. However, he did not get the impression that Sandra was suicidal. Ryan James believed his wife was extremely depressed after learning of the affair. He offered this opinion to many people, including friends and work colleagues. 2 weeks after writing the updated will, Sandra gave her husband a 2-page document in an attempt to fix the marriage. She wrote of their first meeting and early life together, maybe to remind him of the love they once had for each other. She wrote about the hopes and dreams she had had for their family. Surprisingly, midway through the letter, an out-of-place paragraph mentioned plans for her funeral arrangements and suggested to her husband that she was contemplating suicide. 2 weeks later, Sandra requested that her husband give the letter back. He hadn't been swayed by its contents, which indicated that the marriage was unsalvageable. A longtime friend of Sandra's who had known her before she met her husband had noticed a change. Shortly before Christmas, they spoke on the telephone, and Sandra told her friend she was feeling unwell. When they saw each other in person on Christmas Day, the friend, Sandra Harris, noticed a drastic change in Sandra James's appearance. She was pale and trembling, and her brown eyes were framed by very dark circles. This was when Sandra Harris confronted Ryan James about his behavior, and he claimed to have not had contact with Catherine Crooks for 7 days. Sandra James was not as sick as she previously had been in the days before Christmas. She managed to gather the strength to cook Christmas dinner for her family and friends. Her friend Sandra Harris noticed there was one gift left under the tree. It was labelled to Sandra from Ryan. Sandra Harris inquired why her friend hadn't opened the present. Sandra said she knew she wouldn't be receiving anything from her husband this year, but she didn't want the children to think their father didn't care for her anymore. Another friend had also met up with Sandra during the festive period. Marjorie Dixon had seen Sandra on Christmas Eve. Like Sandra Harris, Marjorie was also alarmed by her friend's radical change in appearance. Marjorie Dixon's husband, Dr. David Dixon, was Ryan James's GP. They were also friends, and David saw James on the day he found his wife's body. Instinctively, the doctor questioned his friend whether he had anything to do with her death. James was appalled by the suggestion and denied any involvement. However, detectives were certain there was more to the story. At the time of his arrest on March 17, 1994, Ryan James was living with Catherine Crooks and the children in the home he once shared with Sandra. He told the arresting officer, Detective Sergeant Kenneth Vaughan, "I did not expect anything like this." Catherine had said there was a period after Sandra's passing where she kept her distance. Then, approximately 3 weeks on, she officially moved in with her 3 children to live with Ryan James and his children. After James's arrest, Catherine was left in the house alone while her new partner was in jail accused of murdering his wife. She wasn't there long. Catherine eventually moved away to Wales to get some space. In interviews with officers from the Staffordshire Constabulary, Ryan James categorically denied having anything to do with his wife's passing. He described her zombie-like behaviour around the Christmas period. The explanation was likely phenobarbital, which was attacking her nervous system and also causing the tremors that one of her friends noticed on Christmas Eve. When Sandra had returned from visiting her family, James told the police things had changed and she appeared to be okay again. The authorities did not believe this was just a coincidence, and Ryan James was committed for trial. Stafford Crown Court, May 1995. The trial was scheduled to last almost 3 weeks. 40-year-old David Ryan James pleaded not guilty to the murder of his wife, Sandra. James was firm in his belief that his spurned wife staged her suicide to frame him for murder due to his infidelity. Conversely, Peter Joyce QC suggested that James had replaced Sandra's prescribed antibiotics for a chest infection with phenobarbital and laced her juice drinks with Immobilon in the weeks leading up to her untimely death. The glass on her bedside table contained enough Immobilon to kill 6 men. It was far too much for Sandra's less than 7-stone body to withstand. It was argued by the prosecution that as a vet, the defendant had access to the drugs found in Sandra's system. The medication was in a locked cupboard, to which only Ryan James and his colleagues had a key. Jeffrey Bellringer, who along with Ryan James was a partner in the Spring Hill veterinary surgery, explained how cautious they were when using Immobilon. Bellringer said he would only use the drug with a trusted member of staff, be it a fellow vet or a highly experienced veterinary nurse. He also explained that he wouldn't use the substance at all unless the antidote were at hand. The medicine cabinet was only accessible by a few people, and Jeffrey Bellringer was positive that Sandra James was not one of them. A vial of Immobilon was presented as evidence in the court. Jeffrey Bellringer was ordered to put it down after instinctively picking it up when it was in front of him. Peter Joyce QC prosecuting explained to the witness that there was no antidote in the courtroom. Bellringer said Sandra's involvement with the surgery only extended to her possibly picking up the telephone when Ryan James had to be contacted at home. He was unaware of her presence at the veterinary surgery, but he could not say for certain if she had made a quick visit to pick up standard medication, such as flea or worming treatments for the family pets. Another partner in the firm, Alwyn Vaughan, said he had seen Sandra James in the surgery twice in the month leading up to her death. In fact, he said he had spoken to her. He claimed that his partner's wife warned him that the person her husband was having an affair with was a dangerous woman. Sandra plainly said that the lack of discretion about the relationship could harm the surgery's good reputation. Alwyn Vaughan offered his impression of Sandra. During the first visit, he felt uncomfortable about her demeanor, but the second time they spoke, she seemed more pulled together. The entire situation had put Alwyn Vaughan in an awkward position. There wasn't much he could do about his colleague's conduct outside of work. However, as Ryan James's love life was now spilling into the office environment, Vaughan spoke with James, suggesting it would be best not to have personal visitors regularly attend the surgery. After reviewing who had access to the property, the prosecution came to learn that someone had entered the veterinary surgery using the 4-digit security code between 3:30 a.m. and 4:30 a.m. on the day of Sandra's death. Like the dangerous medicine cabinet, knowledge of the code was reserved for the vets who worked there and just one other member of staff, receptionist Constance Blackburn. Bellringer confirmed he was not the person to enter the veterinary surgery during this period. The vet went on to point out an instance of suicide a few years before where a veterinarian used the drug to end her life. If a vet wants to achieve a swift end, Immobilon is well known to serve the purpose. bell ringer said. Constance Blackburn, a seasoned and trusted member of staff who worked at the surgery for over 30 years, was aware of the gossip. She had even seen Ryan James through the window of a treatment room kissing a woman she didn't know. She was sure that the woman was not his wife, Sandra. Constance lived nearby, sharing a flat above the veterinary surgery with her husband. On January 13, 1994, an unexpected visitor roused her from sleep. No one was scheduled to be in the surgery at 4:10 a.m., long before the business was due to open. A dark speeding car had come to a halt outside. After the driver exited the vehicle, Constance Blackburn heard two doors slamming inside the building. She was ready to hear the burglar alarm go off and was poised to call the police, but the alarm was not activated. It must have been a member of staff with the alarm code. Constance recalled that the sound of the second door shutting in the veterinary surgery was much louder than the first. The door was heavier and was likely the reinforced entrance into the room where the dangerous drugs were kept. As fast as the unknown individual arrived, they got in the car and drove away, staying no more than a few minutes. The vehicle turned left at the end of the drive. Ryan James was the only vet who lived in that direction. Stephen Lomax, Sandra's brother, relayed his conversations with Ryan James in the days after his sister's passing, as well as describing questionable indicators that James felt proved his wife had taken her life, such as filling the freezer with food. James also suggested that Sandra being raped in Belgium when she was 18 was always a, quote, likely cause. Stephen wasn't aware that this had happened, telling the court, he said Sandra had had unprotected sex in Belgium and there were only two people who knew. I asked him what he meant by unprotected sex, and he said she was young, unprotected, was raped. Curiously, as the conversation progressed, James went on talking about methods of suicide or murder. Ryan started to tell me various ways of crushing tablets. It would be hard to detect, Stephen said. Any mention of injections? He was asked. Ryan said if he gave someone an injection, he could do it without leaving a mark. Sandra had a mark on her right hand. Ryan said he didn't know what it was, but my wife retorted it could be a gardening mark, a thorn. Ryan said she had working hands. Ryan said she had hit him at the weekend before and he implied that she had drawn blood. Even before Sandra died, Stephen was concerned for his sister. He confronted Ryan James about the affair, but James's answers lacked any clarity. Stephen Lomax told the court, on 3 occasions I asked him quite bluntly, was the affair over? On one occasion he said she had gone back to her husband, and the other 2 occasions he used words similar to diluted or fading, but I never got a straight answer to say the affair was over or not. His words were he came back because of the children and emotional blackmail. Next to take the stand was Detective Sergeant Kenneth Vaughan. The officer explained that when he attended the scene, Ryan James stated that he had possibly left some of his veterinary drugs in the car, but he could not be certain whether or not his wife had been in the vehicle. Immobilon was mentioned by James, who told the officer it was lethal. According to Detective Sergeant Vaughan, James had said it was not typically a drug that would be left in the car as it had to be stored securely at the veterinary office where he worked. Dr. Winchurch, who was Sandra James's GP, addressed the jury and spoke of his last appointments with Sandra before offering his professional opinion on her mental and physical health. She had visited him in distress after finding out about the affair between her husband and their friend. According to the doctor, suicide did not seem to be at the forefront of her mind. Difficulty sleeping and weight loss appeared to be a knock-on effect of the stress at home, and Dr. Winchurch prescribed anti-sickness medication and light sleeping pills for his patient. A month before Sandra died, she had her last appointment with the doctor. He felt that Sandra was improving and moving on from the betrayal. This seemed to be the case, as on the day Sandra's body was found, a small advert was posted in the local newspaper. Sandra was seeking an unfurnished rental property for a professional family with a lease between 6 to 12 months. The accused offered a differing opinion to Dr. Winchurch's assessment of his wife's well-being. In a statement, Ryan James claimed that his wife had threatened to take her life and his. He contended that Sandra said, "If I had a gun, I would end it now, either one or both of us." Forensic scientist Michael Hammond provided some of the evidence at the trial. He had been the person who analysed the contents of the orange liquid found near Sandra James's body. The base of the 15.5 millilitres of liquid was orange juice, but the glass was also found to include something lethal: 0.5 millilitres of immobilon, the same drug found in Sandra James's blood and stomach. Hammond explained to the court this drug was thousands of times more potent per measure than morphine. The antidote, Revivon, was only discovered in her urine, meaning the drugs had been consumed or administered at different times. Phenobarbital was also a drug identified in Sandra James's body. It was impossible to tell for sure whether it was the first time it had entered her system. The syringe found on top of the wardrobe in the bedroom showed no evidence of being used, as no drug residue was recorded. Michael Hammond said if the immobilon had been administered via injection, death would be immediate, leaving no time to even remove the syringe from the injection site. Consumption orally would take much longer. The expert witness gave a rough estimate of between 10 and 40 minutes. In the case of Sandra James, he thought the drug had been put in the bedside drink as it was in her stomach. 4 blood samples had been taken from the mother of 3, but the locations on her body where they were withdrawn were not listed. The court was told upon examination the pinprick-like marks on Sandra's body showed no signs of drugs being injected. Anthony Hughes, QC defending, pointed out that it would be ludicrous for his client to inject his wife in her dominant hand where some puncture wounds were found. Ryan James had also been the person to tell investigating officers that Sandra feared needles. In his closing argument, James's counsel urged the jury to put the distaste for Ryan James's infidelity aside. Anthony Hughes, QC, said, "It's important to get away from Victorian melodrama and actually think about the evidence. It is important to remember that we are not required to prove that he didn't do it. And of course we cannot. The question is whether it has been proved that he did. Prove so that you are sure. Next week, in 3 months' time. No sort of lurking doubt. No hint of misgivings about it. Sure, you haven't reached a decision out of gut reaction or dislike. I defy you to say that there is no lurking doubt. In this case, it is desperately sad. It gives nobody any pleasure to have to try and countenance with you the real possibility that this lady killed herself, and at the time when she did it, she made it look like her husband had killed her. It is a real possibility. But then who can get inside the mind of a suicide? In opposition during his final address to the jury, prosecuting counsel Peter Joyce QC responded, "This case arises from one of the saddest situations in the world. It is the case of the eternal triangle. It is the case of the vet, his mistress, and his wife. The end result is that his wife is dead from poisoning." The jury, consisting of 8 men and 4 women, returned to the courtroom after deliberating for 6 hours. Their decision was unanimous. David Ryan James was found guilty of murder. After the verdict was read aloud, Mr. Justice Hidden told the defendant he was the most evil, selfish, and criminally callous man he had ever sentenced. "You used your knowledge and expertise in your career as a vet, in which your wife had supported and encouraged you, to put together a calculated and wicked plan to end her life and take her from her children, so that you could afford to live with a woman you had chosen to replace her." Ryan James was sentenced to life and was later told he would have to serve a minimum of 20 years behind bars for the murder of his wife. Outside the courtroom describing the man who had just been convicted, Detective Chief Inspector Peter Hall, who had worked on the murder investigation, said, "In interview, James was always controlled and composed when responding to questions. He was very self-assured and thought he could outwit the force." An appeal was prepared while Ryan James started his sentence at what was then HMP Blakenhurst. He was regularly visited by Catherine Crooks, and during one of those visits, James proposed. In the early 90s, before the Home Secretary limited prisoners' ability to contact the outside world, James gave an exclusive interview to the local paper, the Burton Mail. Catherine sat beside him, but James answered most of the questions. He voiced his frustration at the justice system. "I was told the whole case would revolve around forensic evidence, and the prosecution was convinced the forensic evidence would prove my guilt, but it did not." The interviewer asked James, "Did you think you would be convicted? And when you were, what were your thoughts?" He responded, "I never thought I would be convicted because I thought British justice would not convict an innocent man. I just did not think that anyone could prove the existence of an event that did not happen. I'm not a person to show emotions, but when the jury found me guilty, I felt just empty. I just could not recognize myself from what the judge said about me. He kept saying things I had done, like filling her antibiotic capsules with phenobarbital, and I had not, and no one had proved I had. Yet there was a judge saying I had. I wanted to shout out, 'You are lying.' But how do you prove a negative?" James explained that his marriage to Sandra had been over in his mind for 3 years before he started the affair with Catherine. Even though he no longer wanted to be in a relationship with the mother of his children, he claimed he did not want her dead. She was the landlady who cooked the meals, did the washing and cooking, looked after my children, kept the house neat and tidy, and I handed over the money for these services. It was not a marriage. In September 1995, after being moved to Gartree Prison, Ryan James married Catherine Crooks. A picture of the bride was published, and unless you knew otherwise, it was not obvious that the ceremony took place in a prison. Catherine wore a pale peach blouse and chose a floral headband and floral wedding cake. In response, Sandra's uncle Kenneth Moore expressed his dismay. "It's an insult to Sandra's memory. It is beyond belief." MP Warren Hawksley said, "It's another example of prisons being like holiday camps. There shouldn't be a basic right to marriage." The three James children had been in the care of Catherine since the arrest of Ryan James. Sandra's family were thought to be applying for custody of the youngsters. Then news came in October 1995. Ryan James had won the right to appeal the verdict. Anthony Hughes QC had told the appeal court in London that offence never really got put to the jury at all. Unless the jury was helped to concentrate on the issues, they may duck them and concentrate on instinct. Lord Justice Roch, sitting with Mr. Justice Forbes, said, "This is a case, in our view, which merits further consideration by the full court." In November 1995, Nottingham High Court ruled that the three James children should leave the care of their father's new wife and be placed in the care of Sandra's brother Stephen Lomax. Ryan James attended the hearing escorted by security officers. He nor Catherine James contested the decision. 4 months later, Ryan James's appeal was rejected. James and his new wife had planned to leave the UK if his appeal was successful. Their goal was to emigrate to New Zealand, where James would set up a veterinary practice. However, news of the rejection shattered any plans they made. With a sentence of at least 20 years in prison and the first appeal rejected, it seemed like a cut-and-dry case. That was until March 1996, when Catherine stumbled across what would turn out to be a vital piece of evidence. A note Sandra James had handwritten before her death was hidden in an old copy of a veterinary record magazine that was released 2 months before Sandra's death. The note had sat there, only to be found when the new Mrs. James was cleaning out Ryan James's things. James had been confident he would be struck off the veterinary register in a future hearing, and the magazines would be no use gathering dust in the bedroom used as an office and for storage. The note was short. It read, "Ryan, I leave you absolutely nothing but this note, if you find it in time. Sam." Sam being the nickname Ryan James and her close family used for Sandra. Catherine James told her husband of the note at their next visitation on March 31st. After hearing about the development, the renowned BBC television programme Rough Justice began to look into the case. The episode was called The Vet's Wife, and the production team carried out a private assessment of the case with specialists in their field who assessed the evidence and the court case. Their findings cast doubt on whether Ryan James had murdered his wife Sandra. At the trial, it was said blood was taken from Sandra's body after she died, but unusually there was no record of where the samples were taken. The location mattered, as the results would vary depending on which part of the body it was withdrawn from. Concerning the level of drugs in her system, the new evidence indicated that Sandra would not have been immobile after the first dose, which was contrary to what was suggested in court. It was said she could have driven to the veterinary surgery just after 4 a.m., when Constance Blackburn saw a dark car pull up and then leave the surgery in a hurry. Furthermore, Constance's account was also called into question on rough justice. A senior colleague appeared on the program and said the elderly employee regularly believed people were on the land owned by the veterinary surgery, even if it was proven that was not the case. The same senior colleague said even though the type of drugs in Sandra's system were in the surgery and locked away, they were issued in cardboard boxes. The packages were frequently left unattended for hours while the staff were busy tending to the animals. Additionally, investigators did not lift fingerprints from the medicine cabinet at the veterinary surgery or examine the refuse at the Jameses' home. And the debt that was referred to as a financial motive in court was not a personal debt. It was an outstanding amount on the mortgage. Also, the pinprick-like marks on Sandra's body showed no signs of drugs being injected. It was feasible, according to experts, that these were self-inflicted practice runs as Sandra James had a fear of needles. The use of the antidote also posed questions. Was it possible Sandra made a mistake and took the wrong one? Some reasonable doubt was starting to seep in. The public's response to the discovery of the note was mixed. Handwriting experts compared the writing to Sandra James's penmanship. They believed it was a match. The page had been torn from a spiral-bound notepad kept near the telephone. The perforations on the page and the subsequent use of the pad led to the belief that it had been written in the weeks before Sandra's death. There was concern from the public about Ryan James's guilt. Many had believed in his innocence from the start, and the note just confirmed it. A large segment of people changed their minds after seeing rough justice. Now they thought the vet was telling the truth, although before they were certain he was lying. However, some members of the public felt that the discovery was unimportant, and it did not change a thing. Upon review of the evidence, the case was again referred to the Court of Appeal, this time from the newly appointed Criminal Cases Review Commission. It was heard by Lord Justice Evans, sitting with Mr. Justice Sedley and Mr. Justice Hooper in July 1998. Coleman Tracy QC told the judges, "The core of our case is to say that the overwhelming balance of the evidence as it is now points away from Mr. James being responsible for his wife's death and points to her as the person responsible for it." The court was also provided with evidence that Sandra James was very likely to have been suffering from a depressive illness at the time of her death. It was highlighted that in the 70s, she was prescribed antidepressants. After reviewing all of the evidence, the 3 appeal court judges arrived at a decision. Part of the verdict read, Mr. Tracy QC, counsel for the appellant, though not at the trial, submitted that the note, as we shall call it, was demonstrably a suicide note, written by Sandra James during the 10 days or so before her death, and admissible evidence of her state of mind at that time. The issue before the jury was whether she had or may have committed suicide. There was no other direct evidence of her mental state during the last period of her life. The conviction of murder made in ignorance of the note and without the benefit of psychiatric evidence could not be regarded as safe. The fresh evidence proved he submitted that Sandra James committed suicide, or at least created a doubt she may have done so. Ryan James showed no emotion as the appeal judges concluded that his conviction was unsafe, and he was to be released. In an interview following the conclusion of the appeal and his release, Ryan James told the press, "I have always maintained I did not kill my wife, and I would like to thank all those who supported me and believed in me. I also appreciate the stance taken by the prosecution today, who accepted that had the note been discovered way back at the beginning, I would not have been charged. I now need to rebuild my life." Detective Chief Inspector Peter Hall, who headed the inquiry into the murder, said the force accepted the outcome. This decision is based on new evidence which was not previously available to the court. Before he added, "We have no further comment to make." So where are we now? The battle was not over for David Ryan James. He had another fight on his hands to win back custody of his 3 children. In 1999, on a Welsh television programme, James criticised investigators involved in the case. He claimed they neglected to give his counsel all relevant information in their possession. He said due to this, the trial was based on a financial motive, but if they had handed over all the relevant paperwork, it would be clear that it was not a feasible motive for him to murder his wife. Much has been written in the press about Ryan James, but lingering somewhere after the article about winning a car in March 1990 and the publicity of the murder trial, James made a brief appearance in the press again in December 2002. He was living near Uttoxeter on the Derbyshire border. While working as a locum vet, a hidden camera recorded James entering a safe 9 times at a veterinary surgery on the High Street in Rochester. He was accused of stealing £205 from the practice. However, like the allegation that he ended his wife's life by poisoning her 8 years earlier, James was cleared of any wrongdoing at Warwick Crown Court. It was accepted he only entered the safe to swap smaller denominations so his clients could have the correct change. David Ryan James has remained out of the public eye since. Thank you for listening, and special thanks to our patrons for their support. For more information on this episode, please see the show notes or visit our website, theywalkamonguspodcast.com.